The seven holy founders of the Servite order, also known as the seven holy fathers or the seven Servite saints, were a group of seven men who founded the order of friar servants of Mary, the Servites, in the 13th century. Their names were, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of these names, Bonfilius Monaldi, Bonagianta Manetti, Amadeus of the Amidei, Augusio of the Buondelmonti, Manetus del Antella, Sostenus of the Buondelmonti, and Alexi Falconieri. Here's a brief biography of the seven holy founders. Bonfilius Monaldi. Bonfilius was born into a noble family in Florence, Italy, in the 13th century. He was known for his piety and devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Along with his companions, he founded the Servite order in 1233. Bonaventura Manetti. Manetti was also born into a noble family in Florence. He was a successful businessman before joining the religious life. Along with his friends, he dedicated himself to the servant of God and the Virgin Mary through establishment of the Servite order. Amadeus of Amedi. Amadeus was respected for his membership of the Florentine community. He renounced his wealth and position to embrace the life of the mendicant friar. He played a significant role in the founding of the Servite order and lived a life of humility and service. Uguccio of Buondelmonti. Uguccio came from a prominent family in Florence. He was deeply committed to prayer and contemplation, and he played a vital role in the establishment of the Servite order along with his companions. Manetas del Antella. Manetas was born as well into a noble family in Antella near Florence. He joined Bonifacius Monaldi and the others in forming the Servite order, dedicating himself to a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Sostenus of Buondelmonti. Sostenus was a member of the Buondelmonti family in Florence. He joined his companions in embracing the religious life and was instrumental in founding the Servite order. Alexi Falconieri. Alexi was the youngest of the seven holy founders. He was born as well into a family of noble people in Florence, but chose to forsake his wealth and privilege to live a life of poverty and devotion. He played a central role in establishment of the Servite order and later became its leader. These seven men dedicated themselves to a life of prayer, penance, and service to God and the Blessed Virgin Mary. They lived in the community, embracing poverty and simplicity, sought to spread devotion to Mary and the compassion of Christ throughout the world. The Servite order they founded continues to exist today, with friars serving in various parts of the world, following the charism and spirituality established by the seven holy founders.
The seven holy founders of the Servite order, also known as the seven holy fathers or the seven Servite saints, were a group of seven men who founded the order of friar servants of Mary, the Servites, in the 13th century. They were born into noble families in Florence, Italy, during a time of significant religious fervor and spiritual renewal in Europe. Here is a brief exploration of their history and belief system. The Servites order was founded in 1233 in Florence, Italy, by the seven holy founders Bonfilius Monaldi, Bonagianta Manetti, Amadeus of the Amedi, Ugosio of the Bondelmonti, Mantus del Antala, Sontanus of the Bondelmonti, and Alexi Falcionieri. Inspired by the Blessed Virgin Mary and seeking a deeper commitment to the gospel, they established a religious community dedicated to prayer, penance, and service to the poor and sick. The seven holy founders were deeply devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary and embraced her as their mother and guide. They were particularly inspired by the seven sorrows of Mary, focusing on the suffering and compassion of Mary as a source of strength and consolation. Their spirituality was marked by Marian devotion, humility, and desire to imitate the virtues of Mary and Christ. The Servite order grew rapidly following the foundation, attracting men from various backgrounds who were drawn to the simplicity and holiness of the seven founders' way of life. The order spread throughout Italy and into other parts of Europe, establishing communities dedicated to prayer, contemplation, and to service of others. The seven holy founders were venerated as saints shortly after their death due to their reputation for holiness and the miracles attributed to their intercession. They were canonized as saints collectively by the Pope Leon XIII on December 1st, 1887. Their feast day is celebrated every year on February 17th. Central to the spirituality of the seven holy founders and the Servite order is a deep devotion to the Blessed Mary, Virgin Mary, I should say, sorry. They saw Mary as a model of holiness and compassion, and they sought to emulate their virtues in their own lives. The seven sorrows of Mary, including the prophecy of Simon, the crucifixion of Jesus, were particularly significant in their spiritual lives. The Servite order embraced the evangelical counsel of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They lived a life of simplicity and detachment from worldly goods, choosing to rely on God's providence for their needs. Chastity was seen as a means of dedicating themselves entirely to God, while obedience to their superiors and the rule of the order was paramount. The seven holy founders and the Servite friars devoted themselves to a life of prayer and contemplation. They valued solitude and silence as opportunities to commune with God and deepen their relationship with Him. The liturgy of hours, Eucharist, adoration, and meditation on the mysteries of the faith were central to their prayer life. Rooted in the example of Jesus Christ, who came not to be served, but to serve, the Servite order placed a strong emphasis on service to the poor, sick, and marginalized. The friars sought to imitate Christ's compassion and humility by ministering to the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of those they encountered. Overall, the seven holy founders of the Servite orders left a profound legacy of holiness, humility, and devotion to Mary and Christ. Their example continues to inspire members of the Servite order and all those who seek to live lives of a deeper faith and service to others. As with many saints and founders of religious orders, there are many numerous stories and legends surrounding the miracles attributed to the seven holy founders of the Servite order. While some of these miracles may have been embellished over time, they serve to illustrate the profound spiritual impact these men had on their contemporaries and subsequent generations. Here are a few examples of the miracles associated with the seven holy founders. The healing of a blind man. One of the most famous miracles attributed to the seven holy founders involves the healing of a blind man. According to the tradition, the blind man visited the Servite friary seeking help. The seven founders prayed together for his healing, and miraculously, the blind man's sight was restored. Multiplication of bread. In another legend, the seven founders were faced with feeding a large group of people who came to the friary seeking assistance. Despite having only a small amount of bread, the seven founders prayed over it, and it multiplied, providing enough food to feed everyone present. The resurrection of a dead child. There is a story of the seven founders being called to the home of a grieving family whose child had died. Moved by compassion, the seven founders prayed fervently for the child's resurrection, and miraculously, the child's life was restored. Protection from plague and epidemics. During the times of plagues and epidemics, the seven founders were believed to have interceded on behalf of the people, protecting them from illness and death. Many attributed their survival during these perilous times to the prayers and intercession of the seven holy founders. Conversion of sinners and non believers. Throughout their lives, the seven founders were known for their zeal in preaching the gospel and calling sinners to repentance. Many miraculous conversions were attributed to their prayers and preaching, as they were believed to have the gift of bringing even the most hardened hearts to conversion. These miracles, among others, contributed to the reputation of the seven holy founders as holy men, endowed with special graces and powers from God. Their lives of prayer, penance, and service were seen as exemplary, and their miracles served to strengthen the faith of those witnessed them. While the specific details of these miracles may vary in different accounts, they continue to inspire devotion to the Holy Seven Founders and the Servite Order to this day. The process of sainthood for individuals, including the seven holy founders of the Servite Order, typically involves several stages. Here's a general overview of the process. The first step towards sainthood is officially the recognition of the person's life of holiness and virtue by the Catholic Church. This begins with a local bishop opening an investigation into the person's life, writings to determine if they lived a life of heroic virtue. Once this investigation is complete, the bishop may petition the Vatican's congregation for the causes of saints to grant the title of servant of God to the individual. After being declared a servant of God, the next step is beatification, which requires the recognition of miracle attributed to the intercession of the candidate. This miracle is typically a miraculous healing that occurs after prayers for the intercession of the servant of God. The Congregation for the Causes of Saints investigates the miracle to ensure its authenticity and supernatural character. Once a miracle is confirmed, the Pope may declare the servant of God venerable, acknowledging that they lived a life of heroic virtue. The next stage is the canonization process, is the beatification, which is the formal declaration by the Pope that the individual is blessed and worthy of veneration by the Church. Beatification usually requires the recognition of a second miracle attributed to the intercession of the candidate. Once this second miracle is confirmed, the Pope may proceed with the beatification ceremony, typically held in the candidate's home diocese or in Rome. Canonization is the final step in the process of sainthood, in which the Pope is formally declaring that the individual is a saint and worthy of universal veneration by the Catholic Church. Canonization typically requires the recognition of a third miracle attributed to the intercession of the saint. Once this third miracle is confirmed, the Pope proceeds with the canonization ceremony, which is often held at St. Peter's Square in Rome. Regarding the seven holy founders of the Servite order, they were canonized collectively as saints by Pope Leo XIII on December 1st, 1887. Their process of canonization involved the recognition of their heroic virtue as a group rather than as individuals. Since their canonization, they are venerated together as saints of the Catholic Church, and their feast day is celebrated on February 17th each year. Bonfilius Monaldi is one of the seven holy founders of the Servite order. He was born into a noble family in Florence, Italy, around the beginning of the 13th century. Little known about his early life, but it is believed that he was raised as a devout Christian in an environment that instilled in him a deep sense of piety and devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Bonfilius Monaldi was known for his holiness and humility from a young age. He was deeply committed to prayer and contemplation, often spending long hours in meditation and reflection. His heart was filled with love for God and a desire to serve Him in whatever way he could. Along with the six other like minded men, including Bongianti Manite, Amendos of the Amendi, Ugosio of Bondelmonti, Manetus del Antella, Sostenus of the Bondelmonti, and Alexis Falconeri. Bonifacius Manendi felt called to a life of greater dedication to God. In 1233, they came together to establish a new religious community dedicated to the service of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Under the guidance of Saint Peter of Verona, also known as Peter Martyr, the seven founders adopted a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They wore simple black habits and devoted themselves to a life of prayer, penance, and service to the poor and sick. The seven founders were particularly devoted to the seven sorrows of Mary, and they sought to console her through their prayers and acts of devotion. Bonfilius Monaldi played a significant role in the establishment of the Servite order, providing spiritual leadership and guidance to his companions. He was also known for his wisdom and humility and was greatly respected by both fellow friars and people of Florence. Bonfilius Monaldi lived a life of holiness and virtue until his death, which is believed to have occurred in the early years of the Servite order. He was venerated as a saint shortly after his death, and his feast day is celebrated on February 17th, along with the six other holy founders of the Servite order. Together, they continue to inspire devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and the ideals of poverty, chastity, and obedience lived out in Servite order. Bonagenta Manetti, one of the seven holy founders of the Servite order, was born into a noble family in Florence, Italy, in the 13th century. Little is known about his early life, but it is believed that he received a good education and was well regarded in Florentine society. Bonagenti Manetti was known for his generosity and compassion towards the poor and marginalized. Despite his privileged upbringing, he felt called to a life of greater devotion to God and the Blessed Virgin Mary. Along with the six other like minded men, including Bonfilius Monaldi, Amadeus of Amede, Augusio of the Buondelmonti, Manetus del Antella, Sostenus of the Buondelmonti, and Alexi Folcien- Falconieri Buonaguata Manetti, felt a deep desire to live a life of poverty and chastity, and of course, obedience in service to God. In 1233, Manetti and his companions established the Order of Friar Servants of Mary, also known as the Servite Order, with the guidance of St. Peter of Verona. They adopted a simple black habit and devoted themselves to a life of prayer, penance, and service to the poor and sick. The seven founders were particularly devoted to the seven sorrows of Mary, and they sought to console her through their prayers and acts of devotion. Manetti played a significant role in the early years of the Servite order, providing spiritual leadership and guidance to his companions. He was known for his humility and selflessness, and he was greatly respected by both his fellow friars and the people of Florence. Throughout his life, Manetti remained steadfast in his commitment to poverty, chastity, and obedience. He lived a life of holiness and virtue until his death, which is believed to have occurred in the early years of the Servite order. Manetti was venerated as a saint shortly after his passing, and his feast day is celebrated on February 17th, along with the other six holy founders of the Servite order. Together, they continue to inspire devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and the ideas of poverty, chastity, obedience lived out in the Servite order. Amadeus of the Amedi, from the seven holy founders, is a noble person from a noble family in Florence, Italy, who was born in the 13th century. Like his companions, he came from a background of privilege and wealth, but he felt called to a life of deeper devotion to God and the Blessed Virgin Mary. Amadeus of Amedi was known for his piety, humility, and compassion for the poor and marginalized. He was deeply influenced by the teachings of St. Peter of Verona, also known as Peter Martyr, who inspired him to embrace a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. In 1233, he, along with the other six like minded men, formed the Order of Friar Servants of Mary, also known as the Servite Order. Under the guidance of Peter Verona, they, of course, adopted a life of prayer, penance, and service to the poor and sick. Amadeus of Amedi played an important role in the early years of the Servite order,
providing spiritual leadership and guidance to his companions. He was known for his humility and selflessness, and he was greatly respected by both his fellow friars and the people of Florence. Throughout his life, Amadeus of Amedy remained steadfast in his community to poverty, chastity, and obedience in his commitment. He lived a life of holiness and virtue until his death, which is believed to have occurred in the early years of the Servite order. Like the other founding members of the seven holy founders, Yugosław Bandelmonti, Mantenos del Antella, Sostenos of the Bandulmonti, and Alexi Falconeri were all men of noble backgrounds who devoted their life to the order. They all played key roles in different ways to the order and ensured a devotion to the Holy Mother Mary. The Seven Sorrows of Mary are a traditional devotion in Catholicism that meditate on the suffering and anguish experienced by the Blessed Virgin Mary throughout her life. These sorrows are significant events in the life of Jesus and Mary, highlighting Mary's role as the mother of sorrows. The devotion serves as a means of uniting one's own suffering with that of Mary and Jesus, finding both solace and strength in their example of faithfulness and endurance. The seven sorrows of Mary are as follows. The prophecy of Simon. This sorrowful event is recurrent in the Gospel of Luke, particularly Luke chapter 2 verse 22 to 35, where Mary and Joseph present the infant Jesus in the temple. Simon, a devout man who had been promised by the Holy Spirit that he would not die until he had seen the Messiah, prophesies that Jesus will be a sign of contradiction and that a sword will pierce Mary's soul. The flight into Egypt. After being warned by an angel about King Herod's plan to unalive the infant Jesus, Mary and Joseph flee to Egypt with Jesus to escape the massacre of the holy innocents found in Matthew chapter 2 verse 13 to 15. This sorrow highlights the fear and uncertainty experienced by the Holy Family as refugees. The loss of Jesus in the temple. When Jesus was 12 years old, Mary and Joseph journeyed to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. On the return trip, they realized that Jesus is missing and searched for him for 3 days before finding him in the temple where he was discussing scripture with the teachers, which is found in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52. Mary meets Jesus on the way to Calvary. As Jesus carries his cross to Calvary for his crucifixion, Mary encounters him along the way. This sorrowful meeting between mother and son underscores the pain and of witnessing Jesus' suffering and impending death. Mary stands at the foot of the cross. Perhaps one of the most well known of the seven sorrows is the event that depicts Mary standing at the foot of the cross along the Apostle John in John chapter 19, verse 25 to 27. She witnesses Jesus' crucifixion and suffers with him, fulfilling Simon's prophecy of a sword piercing her soul. Mary receives the body of Jesus. After Jesus passes away on the cross, his body is taken down and placed in the arms of his mother, Mary. The sorrowful moment emphasizes Mary's maternal love and her grief at the loss of her beloved son. Jesus is placed in the tomb. The final sorrow of Mary occurs when Jesus' lifeless body is placed in the tomb. Mary and the disciples mourn his death and await the fulfillment of his promise of resurrection. The devotion to the seven sorrows of Mary encourages believers to meditate on the moments of Mary's life, contemplating her faith, obedience, and endurance in the face of suffering. It is often prayed through the recitation of prayers such as the Chaplet of Seven Sorrows or through personal reflection on each sorrowful event.